Welcome to Drivetime Exchange. As rubber hits the road, hard talk meets great music. Monday to Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m. on Net Radio, taking you above and beyond.
Say a man could sleep until 10 o'clock. Get up and still he ain't late for work. Where he hurry for? He getting transport in front the door. And this poker poke they going whole day and unpaid. They still draw a big fat pay if they like. They could call a big strike. So I tell them sweet, sweet Trinidad, first I love this country bad. I don't want to leave at all. Ever since a small look a ball in sweet, sweet Trinidad, brother was a feeling glad. When I'm dead, please bury me in the center of the city. Yeah, I'll tell you. We got we big oil field just in South. We have all kind of thing to talk about, no regret. You just have to get up and get. And anytime things are a little bad, man, you have a garden in your backyard and no doubt the food almost in your mouth. We got women, color, class or creed, any kind of a woman that you need, you could bet. The sweetest woman you could get. Sweet, sweet Trinidad, first I love this country bad. I don't want to leave at all. Ever since a small look a ball in sweet, sweet Trinidad, brother was a feeling glad. When I dead, please bury me in the center of the city.
All right, everybody, and of course we welcome you to sweet, sweet Trinidad and Tobago. Good afternoon, wherever you may be, Trinidad, Tobago, neighbors in the Caribbean, friends who are streaming all around the globe. We are so happy to have you here on New Era TT Radio, the heartbeat of the Caribbean, as we take you above and beyond. Welcome to the Drive Time Exchange. Monday to Thursday between 4 and 6 p.m. This is where we are at inside of your drive. We're taking you home. And of course, we are spearheaded by none other than journalist extraordinaire himself, Mr. Tony Fraser. Tony, great afternoon to you.
Afternoon to you, Sir Charles. How are things with you?
Things are pretty good, actually. How are you?
All right. I failed to put my headphones on, so I'm doing that right now.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
All right. Here they are now.
Nicely.
I like your choice of Calypso. Funny saying that life in Trinidad sweet. And we have a lot of things that we should be thankful about. And we're going to deal this afternoon, this first program, in the first hour of the program overall. We're going to deal with a man who is a national hero, a Belmont hero also. And he passed away a couple of weeks ago. Not exactly sure of the date, but he had a funeral service last week in Belmont. And we're going to pay some tribute to a man very well known in Trinidad and Tobago in the mass circles. Jason Griffith is his name. Ever heard the name, Chalo?
Yeah, actually, I know the name well. Yeah, I know Mr. Griffith well.
Although he preceded your time.
Yeah.
And so he was a man who brought a band with the Fancy Sailor. The Fancy Sailor with the pretty moves and so on. And we're supposed to have one of those persons here this afternoon on the telephone. He was able to join us via the link. Have you got him?
Yes, I have him there.
All right. Ansel, Ansel, fancy sailor man. Ansel McLean. Ansel, you are there?
I am listening.
All right, good. So we have the full team. We have Anthony Smart, who I understand delivered a eulogy at the funeral service, and of course, Anthony Smart is known in different capacities. But this afternoon, we have him as a man from Belmont, a man who know about fancy sailor dance. I could presume so. And we have Brian Lewis, who I see in a fancy sailor costume. I don't know if he could make the moves, but I see him in the costume. Maybe Ansel taught him a couple of moves. Ansel, did you?
You know these steps, man. I didn't make costumes. I don't teach people to dance or sailor. I did always a sailor dance. You have to have that movements in you.
Right.
What
So have you ever taught Brian some moves in the dance routine? No?
If what?
Have you ever taught Brian Lewis? Have you ever taught him a couple of moves?
I never teach Brian anything. Brian have his own steps.
He can make them.
Huh?
He's okay then. He's a good dancer then.
I didn't say the word is a good. I said you can hold your own.
The man is giving you full pips.
But everybody have their own way of dancing a sailor. No?
Until you're a diplomat, boy.
No. Listen.
So we
I
get
in the
going
sailor
this
man since in the 80s.
All right. So we get going first.
I just watching other people. You learn your steps. If you can't dance, you can't dance. But you learn the steps as you go along.
All right, okay. Brian, the man give you some space to move. So, all right, you're okay for the time being. Anthony Smart, I don't know if he ever played Fancy Sailor Mass, but he talked about Fancy Sailor Mass at the funeral of Jason Griffith. So we heard of it, that it was a fine compliment to Jason Griffith. And therefore, we asked him to come this afternoon to give us an appreciation, a sense of what you said at the funeral service. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hello, Tony, Fraser, and Brian, and the other gentleman. Let me answer your question. I never played Fancy Sailor, but the first mass that I played at the age of 16 was Flower Bag Sailor.
All right.
It's a band called Sunland in Belmont.
Right, yeah.
My parents...
Ursic Road.
Huh?
From Ursic Road.
Yes, just about less than 100 yards from where we lived on Norfolk Street. Right. And my father had a rule in the house. You could play mass once you get your senior Cambridge and you go on to your A-levels. In those days, it was higher school certificate. Okay. And my mother was a very avid mass person, very quiet. But like, as we say these days, she would get a jumbie around carnival time. You know, she would want to go to the tents and so on. And she would make dungaree pants for us and so on. We would go to the carnival frolic in Belmont, and Belmont boys intermediate, and so on. But the rule was that you could play mass once you got your senior grade. So my first mass was Flower Bag Sailor. It was called Chain Gang. So my mother made the flower bag costume for me, and I painted the stripes around, you know, because we were prisoners and so on. So that that is an introduction to the Belmont in my time, and you know, and in Jason's time to some extent, a little earlier than that. So Jason's stepson Roy Pierre, with whom I grew up in Belmont, called me a couple nights before the funeral and asked me if I would say a few words. He says no more than 2 minutes about Jason. So I said, yeah, fine, I'd love to do that.
That's kind of impossible, right?
What's that?
That's a mandate that's kind of impossible to achieve.
Of course it was impossible, but I didn't tell Roy that. What I said at the eulogy was, I'm up here for 2 minutes, but I know Roy can't come and pull me off after 2 minutes. So Roy was a great masked man himself. I don't know if you know Roy, but Roy went to New York. He was Jason's stepson, and as Roy put it in his eulogy, he got the vibes from Jason because he went to New York and he produced masks at Labor Day in New York for 25 years. And he was the king of Juve, but it wasn't like the typical Juve mud mask. It would, it would be a sort of Tuesday mask, Juve morning, all kinds of characters and so on. And if you saw Roy at the funeral, he was dressed in his top hat and tall shoes and so on, in costume. Roy was all carnival. He has come back to Trinidad
on the phone
again. But he says he got the vibes from us, from Jason. And so I got the opportunity to talk about Jason in the context of the Belmont that I grew up in, that Jason grew up in, and so on. My parents grew up in. Well, after the World War. Jason was 98 when he died. I think 97 when he died. He would have been 98 on the next day or something like that. I'm only 78, so I'm almost a generation, or maybe a generation younger than Jason. But it was the same sort of Belmont that we grew up in. And I was happy that Roy asked me to say to say a few words, because it turns out that my family and Jason's family are almost family, in the sense that Jason grew up on Palmer Street in Belmont, opposite to my father's family. So that my father's sisters, my aunts, knew Jason's elder sisters, Sylvie and Cecile. So that it was fortuitous that Roy asked me to talk, not even knowing of the family connection. As a matter of fact, one of my father's best friends was a man called John Desant, who became the transport commissioner, the head of the licensing authority. He married Jason's elder sister, Cecile. And I knew Cecile because Cecile and John used to come home to my father's house. My father didn't have too many friends coming home and so on. He was busy minding 12 children. So that, but John was one of his close friends that used to come home. So I knew Cecile. And then Cecile died fairly young, and John married my father's first cousin, Sheila Smart, who was a matron at the hospital, Port of Spain General Hospital. So Roy really didn't know what he was doing when he asked me to talk. So I felt, I was qualified to pay tribute to Jason on behalf of the Smart family in Belmont. So that I know that there are other people on the online, so I don't want to dominate. So maybe
go ahead for a little while again.
I see. So that I talked about the Belmont that Jason grew up in and Jason contributed to, and that made Jason. Belmont was a bustling, thriving little town. We had businesses on nearly every corner. As I said in the eulogy, within a diameter of maybe 100 yards, we had 4 pharmacies, all doing well. You had Pickett's Corner, where you used to have the political meetings, Pickett's Pharmacy. You had McCarthy's Pharmacy, just below Thick Road on Norfolk Street. Just around the corner on the Thick Road, you had Jocelyn's Pharmacy. And then at the just up Norfolk Street from Murphy Road, maybe less than 100 yards, you had Reed's Pharmacy. So 4 pharmacies in a very small area, and all thriving, it appeared to be, right? So that so there was the bustling business that went on in Belmont, and Belmont also produced great sportsmen, great teachers, great artists and artists, great academics, great clergy. It was an amazing, amazing place. And it was all about unity in Belmont. As I said, you had people living close to each other. One might have been a blacksmith or selling coals, and the other one might have been a lawyer, as it was the case in my own family. My father was a lawyer. And right next door to us in Belmont, after a while, because we had the binos before, but came to live a man by the name of Sam Ganesh, who used to sell coals at the corner of Norfolk Street and Norfolk Road. And then he graduated into selling roti.
Roti shop.
Yes, right. So an interesting place. Belmont produced the first president of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, in Ellis Clark. Belmont produced David Rudder. Belmont produced Nap Hepburn. I mentioned Nap Hepburn. You might know who Nap Hepburn.
Nap Hepburn was my neighbor on Sandhurst Street. We live next to each other.
Is that right?
Yeah,
I didn't realize that you were Belmont too. I didn't know you were.
Yeah, man, Belmont.
I know you married into a strong Belmont family.
Yeah. So it's Belmont all around.
All around.
All right. As David Rudder says, the capital city of the world
is Belmont.
according to Rudder. All right. So here we have another Belmont man here, Brian Lewis, who is has another category he's going to talk about later on in a second program that we're going to have. But right now we have him here as a man who do some dancing. He get a little tips there from Ansel as that you're right, he does move and so on and so on. Your association with Jason Griffith, Brian.
Well, first off, I must thank you and Sir Charles and New TT for this opportunity to discuss and have a conversation about a man who is a legend and an icon in more ways than one, and a Belmont icon, as you indicated. So I must say, Mr. Smart, I grew up in a more fractious Belmont. I grew up in a Belmont in the days when the boys were by Novel, which was next to Mr. Reed, having their little disagreement with Randolph Burroughs and the Black Power days, if you recall.
Yes.
I like how you put it, Brian. Disagreement.
All right. But I absolutely treasure my experiences in Belmont growing up single parent. But I just want to say this, the Smart family, I don't want this to come across the wrong way, right? But I may use the word aristocrat, but it may sound bad, but it's a contextual. So the Smart family was this Belmont family. I knew them. I heard Mr. Smart, who has achieved so much that Belmont and the Smart family should be proud of. He spoke about Palmer's Lane, but I knew the Smart family from the corner of Urtic Road and Norfolk Street.
There are two houses up from Urtic Road.
That's right.
Street. But my father's family
whenever they spoke about the Smarts, it was with awe, and it was so funny. But it was a family that, as I said, in a fractious Belmont, they were a no-touch family, both the boys and the girls and everything, They and the Reed family in particular, as you know, the pharmacy was on Norfolk Street, and the Reeds lived across the road from the pharmacy, and then you had Norville. So, and then you had, I'm talking about in my growing up days, right? Jason and Clyde, the barber. But in terms of, I've always been intrigued and interested because as Mr. Smart mentioned, and Ansel. So Ansel McLean, who we have on, is now my I don't know, he's really important because he's the man that I was sent to when I expressed an interest in ticking off one of my bucket list items, which was to play Fancy Sailor. And Ansel is the one who I take all the advice from the last 3 years. He did in his own way give me a quick study in the sailor dance, but I haven't mastered it yet. But I have made a commitment, God willing, to master at least 2 or 3 of the dancers, because I know that I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but I know the Belmont Exotic Stylish Sailors have something up their sleeves in terms of Carnival 2026 as it relates to Jason, Mr. Griffith. I'm sure Ansel could talk more, but he knows everything inside out of the history of Jason Griffith. But because I grew up on Bedford Lane, which may be familiar to the Belmontonians in the room, they will know that Bedford Lane is, depending on how we look at it, the back of Pelham Street. So that
on the front
Jason
of Norfolk.
Griffith, again, I heard he grew up on Palmer Street, but I always knew Mr. Griffith on Pelham Street. And therefore, when there was the carnival activities, there was just up, because when you had to go to church in St. Francis, the church, the route, obviously, there was no shortcut. Even though there were a couple of barricades, I don't know if Mr. Smart will remember. I don't know if I roamed in Belmont.
I roamed all over. Mr. Lewis.
So there was a barricade in Belmont. You know, Belmont had a lot of barricades, right? They had one on St. Margaret's Lane. When we grew up, there was one on Bedford Lane. So there was no shortcut to St. Francis Church. So you had to either go by Clifford Street, pass by Wayne Barclay and them, and then come down Pelham Street.
Yes.
For us, the shortest route was, because we lived at number 3 Bedford Lane, which was just 2 houses away from Myler Street. So the route for us was to go out to Myler Street, turn left, and then go through the back of St. Francis Church.
Well, we used to walk up Norfolk Street, turn right on Myler Street.
Right.
Then turn left on Pelham Street and get into the church at the back. Yeah.
So Jason Griffith
back of the
was
church.
Right there,
back of the church
Carnival season. You always used to observe, and then when Carnival time, there was a point in time. I know Ansel will remember this because he and I have spoken incessantly over the last couple of years. And Tony, there was a time when Belmont was Carnival. The bands would parade. There were a number of steel bands. You had, during my time, Textile Amboys, which was up on the little hill by where Belmont Junior Secondary is. You had Casablanca in their heydays. And there was Edmund Hart on Jainham Avenue. You had Ken Morris. And then on the corner of Pelham Street and Myler Street, there was a greenhouse where there is now an apartment upstairs and down. So where Wendell Manwaring lived, I recall when I was younger, a mass band, I think, came out from there. So my point was there was mass all around. So I always had playing fancy sailors on my bucket list. But as you know it is, you would have, in my year growing up, you then could play mass. So we played with Edmund Hart, my wife and I and our friend, we played with Wayne Barclay. Through the years, they went to Poison when Wayne Barclay stuff. I didn't go. I started playing, funny enough, with Gregory Rousseau and Fitzgerald Hines, and then in a band from South, Tribal Connection, Indian Mass. And then what happened was, before I handed over to Ansel McLean, as life will have it, I had a near-death circumstance following the marathon in, I think it was 2023. I got something called, I can't pronounce it, rhabdo. 2023. And what happened was I was on a prolonged medical kind of treatment, and it's not been long with it, it's related. And the doctor told me, well, I could not play mass. And I remember talking, I'm a member of Harvard Club, to Gerard Moore. And I said, boy, Gerard, I can't play mass. You know, the doctors say that I can't be in the heat, I can't be jumping up, I can't drink. And Gerard Moore said, boy, come and play fancy sailor, the pace slow. And you don't have to worry about the frenetic kind of carnival. I said, okay, but he said, go. And he said, but I'll put you on to the best person. I'm putting you on to somebody who will look after you, sort you out properly, was Ansel McLean. And he gave me a number. I called and Mr. McLean, I can't even call him Ansel. sportsman in his own right in Belmont, just like Jason Griffith and Jim Hardin and these guys, Belmont Battalion, Colts. And I went to Ansel and I said him, and Ansel sorted me out. And I've played with, I've achieved something I always wanted to achieve. Because fancy sailor, as far as I am aware growing up, Belmont was the headquarters of fancy sailor mass. You know, and I don't mean to blaspheme, but it was like the Vatican and Rome and all these things. Belmont was fancy sailor. So, you know, I've been playing with Belmont exotic stylist sailors, and you know, the band has its challenges in terms of, you know, it's not no longer in the heyday. When I recall Sailor's Painted Tongue with Jason Griffith, I do like to get into numbers, but I think I could remember the days. The band was never as big as Borokeets, another Belmont institution, but it was like 1,200 or 1,000, and still will stay with their fancy sailor mass. But before I hand over to Ansel, I must say that I don't necessarily think that Mr. Griffith would necessarily approve of my interpretation of fancy sailor mass. Why I say that, Ansel? From what I've read over the years, he didn't believe in the backpacks. He believed that you must be able to carry this big headpiece, which I don't too like, Ansel will tell you that, and that you're not playing sailor mass if you can't dance on the area sailor dance, which, as Ansel said, I try a little thing when me, Ansel and them still line up, we crossing judging point, but other than that, I'm a chip. And, but it has been an awesome experience. And
so did you ever play with Jason's band?
No, I played with the son band of Jason. So the way I see it, Ansel again, me, I mean, I say, up Jim Hardin, the grandfather, well, Jim Hardin, into Jason Griffith, there was Boss, and then there is Best. Best is really associated with, as far as I'm aware, Ansel McLean. So he's the best person. So I played with Ansel McLean and the Best. So the spirit of Jason Griffith was there, because I always heard Ansel and them, and I mean Ansel McLean, Francis William Smith, Tony Lewis, Robert Miller, Courtney Brown, and some of these names. They always talk about Mr. Griffith, and he's there, and he's still very active and has a view and an opinion until his passing. But I know Mr. McLean is on the phone waiting patiently, so he probably, especially if we're making him miss a cricket match.
So Ansel, your turn. Tell us about the fancy sailor mass in Belmont and the role that Jason Griffith played in all of this.
Well, what I could say, growing up as a little fella, I played mass with my father since I was going to school. I mean, the days when mass used to be on the road, Tuesdays put the mass, and Mondays any kind of thing. So that was always in me. When I went I was living over for 1 year, and then I came down and I lived Industrial Lane, 39 Industrial Lane, when I was around 15, 16. And my father was in charge of Sunland Steel Band. So Sunland then came into our yard and bringing the floorback sailor mass. But all my father used to tell me, pan is not for you. Because I learned tailoring, and I get work making sailor suit. So when the pan practicing, he said, you have work to do your sailor. Someday I moved up and I came up. When Sunland moved back out of the lane, I came into Baptist Lane to live. And I formed a group by the called Night Walkers. And a gentleman decided doing the stencil for us. He put Night Whalers, which we accepted. Robert Miller, Martin Luby, Niles, all of we formed the group. We played mass with Satisfiers. We played mass with our boys.
Boys.
And then these bands start crashing here and there. And we decided, look, we played Dixieland too. We decided, look, Dixieland, come on, done with that. Our boys crash this thing. But we not tell them plain I not live in Belmont. I belong to Belmont. We then went to join with Bowling in the Avenue. Bowling was playing an Indian mass. And we have a group, about 60 or 70 of us. Robert Miller, Martin Lewis, the designer for the group. But we had a big side. So we had meetings and discussing what we could do and what we could do. When we went by Bowling, make you understand. Any mass we playing is what he have on the wall. We tell him, well, nah, we ain't playing that, man. We gonna draw our own mass and bring it. He said, well, if we can't play that, we can't be any band. And then went Glendon Morris. Not Glendon, the father. Here he was going out of action. And we went by him. They can understand, look, we have a group of fellas, about 50 or 60 a week. Let me keep your band going. And he tell me, nah, he tell me, take the band. But don't take it in. That didn't make no sense. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. We're hearing you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Yeah.
We are listening attentively.
So we just had a meeting among myself because we had a big group. And we decided, look, let me go and talk to Jason and play Fancy Sailor. We went by Jason and Jason said, it ain't no problem. Because in those days, Jason was white sailor. The Fancy Sailor was white. And we said, look, we ain't playing no white, we go play color. They tell me, no problem. We then bring aside about 40 away. And he accept we. So them fellas let them know with the sailor, they drinking and they play the tail and mash up headpiece, all kind of thing. And Jason call a meeting and say, Jason fellas and them say, look, them fellas want to mash up the band. We have a nice sailor band and them come in and do thing. So we had a meeting with Jason and tell him, look, we really come to mash up any band. We enjoy ourselves. And then he made me to understand, look, if you enjoy it, you can't enjoy it so. Because we don't play that kind of mass. I then call a meeting with my players and them and tell them, if we had to play with Jason to maintain the band, we must have some kind of organization. So we decided, look, if we play mass with Jason, anyone, because the committee for which side was about 12 or 15 a week, or 5 women, because all of we making the mass. Anyone in the committee member that does not come back with a headpiece, we throw them out of the section. And so we decided we're going to make a try with it. But when we started, we used to use cardboard and make a wrong headpiece and then put ears and put nose on it. And stick whatever thing we on top of it. But it just wasn't written right. Senior came up and showed us how to bend the wire in order to get a proper headpiece. Which some of the fellas decided they could do it. But I, as a tailor, I had to sew all the costume. So I never take up the wire bending. So I will make the costumes, have a big tent in the yard, tell them what I want to do, and they decorate it. And so we move on. That's in the 80s, 80-something. But the biggest, the most fantastic side we ever had was when Jason played hats off to the old-fashioned sailors. We decided, well, look, we are playing the same thing he played. We playing this hats off to the old-fashioned sailor. And we decided to play Scaramouche, which is the big long hat with the feather decided he had. And some of the members used half a cape. We ended up with 150 of us. So we had a big hit, so everybody looked forward to see what, because we call ourselves Night Whalers. So every year we improving and improving. And then Robbie left and bring his own section, he and Martin. But I maintained the group. Martin wanted me to leave and go and play with it. And next, someone aside, I said, boy, I belong to Belmont. I could stick with Belmont. And so I started improving because as a tailor, I don't want to play no drill. I don't want to play no plain cloth. I start traveling in America. And when I go to America, I get kind of fancy material. Once you buy the fancy material, you don't have to put these sort of flowers or that thing. You buy a fancy material, you cut it to suit. As a tailor, I go know that. And so the team improved and improved and improved. And then when Jason had a falling out with his section leaders, it was a different story. We then formed the boss, but we still maintain the fancy sailor. We stick with the fancy sailor. Then Desmond Mitchell tell us, instead of we carrying, because a lot of time with the headpiece, then fellas used to take it over, put it on the stick, and hold it over the shoulder. Desmond Mitchell said, why they don't make a backpack to carry the headpiece, so you could have a cap and then carry the backpack. So we made about 15 or 20 of the backpacks. And the other fellas play with cap and all different things. We take the backpack that he bed and we cover the backpack with foam and all kind of thing and make it part of the costume. Then we put epaulets onto it. And then we improve the whole backpack. That when you watch the backpack of the mask, you will see a sailor color. And when you look at the front look like the front of the mask. So you wouldn't know whether you have on a backpack or not. And so we start improving on it. Mm-hmm. And then we reach. Hello?
Yeah, we are listening to you. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Another year when we played with Jason, because the headpiece of them became, to put on your head, it have weight now. Yeah. So we decided we go, particularly I play some kind of mask with animals. So I traveling going to America, I bring down a set of these stuffed toys. Bring down a lot, elephant. All animals.
So what I'm gathering from what you're saying, Ansel, is that it's a mask that developed over time, evolved. Different parts of the costumes were put together and so on. And as I understand it, a man called Diamond Jim Harding played a significant role in the band. He was a designer, as I am told. Of course, he was a big center forward for Colts, Battalion in his time. Yeah. All right. So let me come back to Anthony Smart to get from you a sense of the core of what you said at the funeral with regard to Jason Griffith. As listeners, viewers would know, we are doing something of a tribute to Jason Griffith, the fancy sailor, king of Belmont, who developed the mask over a period of time, and he passed away at 97, I think, and there was a funeral service for him.
I played with him from in the 80s, you know.
Right. So, Anthony Smart, go ahead with the core points of your eulogy.
Well, the thing is, we need to mention that Jason was a mass player, but that was during a certain time of the year. But Jason his profession was that of a barber. I think we need to mention that. And he was a barber extraordinaire. through Belmont Barber. Now, when I was growing up, but I think I'm a little older than Brian and Ansel. I'm 78. Brian must be about in his late 50s, early 60s, and so. So
that is a little boy.
And I don't think I know. I don't think I know Mr. Ansel. So
Ansel in his 80s. So
he's in his 80s. Oh, I see.
I born 1941.
Yes. So in Belmont, in my time, you had a number of backyard barbers. Fellas learned to trim and they trim in the back of the yard and so on. But Jason was a professional barber. He had a business as a barber, just like any other business in Belmont. It was at the corner of things, Shelburne Lane and Norfolk Street, pretty close to Palmer Street where he grew up.
Opposite Palmis.
Sorry?
Opposite Palmis, actually.
Yeah, opposite.
Opposite
Palmer Street. And the institution, as I called it, was called Jason and Clyde. I made a joke in the in the eulogy. As a young boy, I went to Jason's barber shop. But I always wondered who Clyde was, because never saw Clyde. The other person trimming there with Jason was Poppy. But I didn't qualify to get trimmed by Jason because I was too young. Poppy used to trim me. You see? As a matter of fact, you don't use the word trim anymore. It's now haircut and so on.
Poppy had plenty chat.
Yes. So it was an institution in Belmont. So as far as I know, that institution, that business place was the only barber shop in Belmont. While you had other, backyard barbers and so on. And the only one that I was aware of, certainly on the main road on Norfolk Street, was Jason and Clyde, and it lasted for many years. As a matter of fact, when I grew up and I had children, my wife brought my two sons as little boys. We lived in Maraval. My wife would bring my sons to get their haircuts from I don't know if it was Jason. Maybe Jason wasn't trimming anymore and so on. Might have been Poppy, so that the point I want to make is that he made it into a business and a thriving business, just like so many other people did in Belmont. And I think it was Brian who mentioned Holder in passing. Now, Holder had a haberdashery store on Norfolk Street, right, opposite to another store of the same kind, this time run by the Simongals.
By the river.
Huh?
By the river.
Yes, directly opposite to each other, and both of them were doing well. But the point I want to make about Holder is that Holder, I think, I may be wrong, but I think I'm right, was responsible for Carnival in Port of Spain before the Carnival Development Committee and NCC and so on took it over and centralized it in the Savannah. Because all the Port of Spain bands used to come up Norfolk Street and turn left on Earthquake Road, where Holder built a stage, right? And they all used to come and pass through Belmont. And Holder was the one responsible for that. He used to have those big loudspeakers and so on. I remember in 1951, clearly I was 5 years old at the time. And I still remember Trouble in Arima as the song that was the big song at that time. I think it maybe became the Road March, and so I'm not too sure. But I think we need to remember that Holder was the person who pushed the carnival at that point in time. And I'm sure that Jason would have been part of that too, and so on, so that the other point I want to make about Jason is that, you talk about the fancy sailor dance and so on. Jason was a top-class dancer, used to win dancing competitions in the days when you had dancing competitions at the Princess Building around the Savannah where Napa is now. So he must have used that skill to develop his sailor dance and so on. And in addition to that, very important, Jason was a saga boy. But he was more dignified than just a saga boy. He was dapper. He was decent, and he was dapper, and he was a dancer. The 3 Ds. And I can have a clear picture of Jason now in his two-tone shoes. I don't see too many people anymore. And his beautiful mustache.
Yes. And I know he had a hat on that he kind of slid at the side a little bit, you know.
Iconic picture, man, of Jason.
Yes, yes.
Jason was a real decent, wonderful man. In addition to being a great cultural icon and responsible for the mass in Belmont.
I don't know if you all know, but there was another significant fancy sailor dancer from Belmont, a man called Austin Wilson, who was played football for Malvern actually, but he was a master dancer, slim, fine fella. I knew him because he worked at Government Broadcasting Unit for a long period of time, and also Radio Trinidad, where I worked. And so he and Rocky McCollin always talked about Austin Wilson's fancy dancing. I never saw him in full action. He died some time ago. He must have been pretty old that time. I don't know if Ansel knew him, but he was a master dancer. So that we, kind of summarizing where we have gone, this man was a significant, man in terms of bringing out a mass man, in terms of bringing out a particular and a peculiar kind of mass from Belmont. And I repeat again that I am told, and Jim Hardin told me also, because I knew Jim Hardin because he lived opposite my in-laws in St. Francois Valley Road. And he was more or less the designer. As he told me, Jason Griffith was the organizer of the band, the leader of the band. And Diamond Jim was the creative man in terms of the making the mass and so on. So I don't know, Brian, you have anything else to say about Jason? Your experiences with him?
I want to say something in summary, because I know this segment of the program is saying, but I will defer to Ansel McLean. But before that, I wanted to just say something. I said in an op-ed today that Mr. Jason Griffith is a victim of TNT's gone and forgotten culture. I just wanted to quote Winston J.P. Peters in a quote in an article related to the death of Jason Griffith said, Trinidad and Tobago has a very fragile memory of things that we do. I say fragile because it is easily forgotten and easily broken. And I would have said that Gypsy calls it a fragile memory, and I call it a gone and forgotten culture. And I say that to say this. The 51 Pelham Street was given the designation as one of a cultural landmark. But why I say that is this. At Mr. Griffith's funeral on Saturday, the 28th of June, 2025, at the St. Francis Church, and he was interned at the St. Margaret's Church Cemetery on Pelham Street, and the back of Pelham Street, and he lived on Pelham Street. I'm not quite sure. I think it was Mr. Smart that made the observation in his eulogy that it was only Jason Griffith. In other words, a Catholic church and an Anglican internment in terms of unity. But what I found was why I said the gone and forgotten culture. I would have anticipated and expected. I mean, the Belmont community came out in support. Mr. Smart was there representing, as he said, his family. You had the former Prime Minister and Member of Parliament for what has been Northern St. Ann, Stuart Young. But I would have anticipated, given Mr. Jason's contribution, more persons from the Carnival fraternity and more persons from the various organizations. I wouldn't call their name because I didn't notice them, but I found that was disappointing, and it reflects how we treat our heroes, our legends, and our icons. And on that note, I hand over to Mr. McLean.
So a final quick note. Yes, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, if I could interject, while I take the point that Brian has made, I think the country has paid proper tribute to Jason in that he received a national award for his contribution to the culture, the Medal of Merit Gold. So in that sense, we have recognized him. It says, there could have been more people at the funeral and so on, representing the various institutions. In addition to that, there is a link road that is named after Jason Griffith. It's called the Griffith Morris Link Road. It is a short road, but an important road. It links Belmont's Circular Road to the Lady Young Road, so that if you're coming out of Belmont and you want to get onto the Lady Young, you don't have to drive all the way around that biggest roundabout in the world. Right? You don't have to drive all the way around the Savannah to get to the Lady Young Road or to get to St. Anne's, you see. So that, he was recognized for the contribution that he made. And as I said, I agree with Brian that maybe we should have seen more people representing at the funeral, but then Saturday morning people have their things to do. But the former Prime Minister was there, and the Member of Parliament for Jason's area for Belmont was there. And
okay. A final word from you, Ansel. Your memory. Give us a personal memory of Jason.
One of the things I must say that in those days, Belmont people used to support Belmont. Belmont had a lot of mass coming out of it. As I heard Smart say, the competition was an article holder used to run. And all the mass used to come out of Belmont. Belmont used to support Belmont. For some reason, it's like a dying art. They rather play the naked mass than the costume mass. And Belmont don't have naked mass. So you find the sailor mass come like a dying art in Belmont. But Belmont was noted for tribal mass and sailor mass. But the banners on them today is nakedness.
Yeah.
So
and don't forget Ken Morris mass, the master of the copper designs.
Yeah, well, yes. And I tell you, Belmont was mass long time. Everybody wanted to see what Belmont have. But what happened now, if you notice, the Asian people don't come out and see mass anymore because it's nakedness. So they ain't going away. You watch the Savannah now in the stands on them. There's nobody there. Why? Because in a sense, you're coming to see the 4 or 5 big band of them is naked people. How they judge them, I don't know. So people are not coming out to see that. They're not carrying their children to see it. When you want to see mass, you come out Carnival Saturday with the kiddies Carnival. Where you go then see mass.
Well, we want to thank you very much, Ansel McLean, Anthony Smart, and Brian Lewis for igniting a little bit of the memory of a significant mass man in the country, somebody who propelled, I wouldn't say that he created it from what I've heard, but he propelled the whole fancy sailor mass forward in his time.
Original fancy sailor.
Yeah. All right. So we thank you again, Anthony Smart, Brian Lewis, and Ansel McLean. Brian is going to stay with us for another part of the program where we're talking about a different subject. We're talking about professionalism in sports, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but across the Caribbean. So, Chalo,
anytime you can call me, no problem.
Right. You can give us an appreciation of where the station can be heard.
No problem. I will do that. Let me play your song and I'll come back and give you that.
Sure.
Oh, since I married Dorothy, She have me going crazy. Since I married Dorothy, she have me going crazy. Well, it's put like fire. I can't take it no longer. No, 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 I can't stand the pressure. Like she want me to commit murder. She have a sailor man. She have a Chinese man. Let go the Chinese man. Pick up with a policeman. A complaint. She want to bomb down Port of Spain. If I raise my hand at all, you're surprised to hear how she will ball. It's the same behavior. I can't take it forever. Oh Lord, I'm going crazy. No Dorothy for me. She have a sailor man. She have a Chinese man. She had a policeman. Pick up with a steel band man.
Classics are heard right here on New Era TT Radio.
Right. And Charlo, just before you go into the different things, just to inform our viewers and our listeners that come Monday next week, Monday and Tuesday, we are doing a different kind of tribute to the man who just sang that calypso there, the Mighty Sparrow. It's his 90th birthday. I think it's on Tuesday. And so we're going to have two programs, one on Monday, one on Tuesday, recalling and analyzing the work of Sparrow. And we have some significant people with us. Dr. Rudolph Otley, who has written a couple books on Calypso. He's a tent manager and all of that, and studied, he got his PhD in Calypso history. And we also have Zeno Constance, who is also a Calypso historian. And somebody who has done a lot of plays with Calypso as the core of it. And of course, we cannot have such a program without Professor Hollis Liverpool, the mighty Chopdust, to come and talk to us about Sparrow. And Zeno is going to be playing the music of Sparrow from Gina and Dinah to the present. So a big program next week, Monday and Tuesday.
I look forward to it. I actually do, So, yeah, people look out and maybe you can join us right here on New Era TT Radio. Let me tell you how you can find us, right? In case you're wondering, how do I find these people? Well, you can go up to our website. We are at newerattradio.com. And that way you can stream it us all throughout the day, all right? You can also, in your browser, just put in New Era TT Radio. And that way you'll be able to hear us on TuneIn, which will allow you to connect to your smart devices like Alexa and all your Google Assistants, your smart TVs. You'll be able to find us there. And, of course, we on our social media handles, you can get us. Like right now, we are streaming to YouTube. And also you can get us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And one other thing to let you know that in our morning session, we stream between 6 and 8. We have the morning show that goes live on M&E TV, which carries the breakfast show on Flow, on Amplia, on Digicel, and on Tricore. So there are a number of ways you can get us. And just look for New Era. Just put it in and you will see us. We will pop up.
Okay. So you cannot go in the traditional kind of manner to 100.1 or 2 or 3, all right?
No,
that's no longer an option.
No, as you know what they call it terrestrial radio.
Oh, yeah.
You can't get us on terrestrial radio.
Great. All right, so that is that, and we move on to another subject with Brian Lewis in particular. Brian, of course, was the head of the local Olympic committee for some time, and he's now in the same kind of responsibility for the Caribbean Association of Olympic Committees, I suppose, its name. And I had a little chat with him, and Brian, of course, has been writing on this subject for some time now about professional sport in the Caribbean as a means. Well, in Trinidad and Tobago to start with, it's not that we haven't had some semi-professional football going back to way in the 1970s and 80s. We had the league. What's the man's name? Sweet, something Sweet. Don't remember his first name. So we've had a measure of professional sport in the region. Cricket, of course, goes back a long time. We've had boxing, professional sport, and so on. But we haven't taken it on, Brian, in my opinion, as a kind of full-time, permanent uh, kind of way that we treat sport and allow people to make a living from sport. We've had, as I'm sure that you're aware, we've had footballers who went far and wide in the 70s and 80s playing professional football, and up to now, we still have them. We have the likes of York and Latapi played in different parts of England and Portugal for a long period of time. Brian, first question is it possible? We have a small population in the Caribbean, limited resources, and so on. But is it possible, given your own association with professional sports, that there can be, in given sports, there can be professional leagues in football, in athletics? We have a lot of international athletes and so on. Is that possible?
Tony, it is that it's a complex issue. The whole concept of sport as an industry. I recall when I became president of the Trinidad Tobago Olympic Committee in 2013, I tried to encourage for example, the TTUSA established a conference called the Sport Business TT. I will try to articulate that there was need for an entrepreneurial approach to sport. The reality is that efforts have been made over the years, from the Arthur Suite ASL days, all through the years. The main challenge is cultural, in my view. We have not been able to go past the cultural code in Trinidad and Tobago, and I would dare say the wider Caribbean, of sport is recreational and it's a hobby. The reality is that sports is a 600 billion US industry, and we ought to be finding a space inside of that 600 billion US industry. We have had individuals who have benefited from that. The Dwight Yorks, the Brian Laras, the Bravos, the Pollards, the Narines, and many others. But in terms of structuring as an industry, we have not been able to catalyze that. And that is a fundamental problem in terms of getting the industry. Now, let me just say quickly, I've been trying to get on to Nelson, Chris Stokes, Dr. Stokes, the four-time Olympian in bobsleigh, more known in particular as it relates to cool runnings. He's an entrepreneur. He has his own fintech company. And he really has an understanding about sport and the business of sport, especially given the Jamaica experience. So hopefully we'll be able to get him on, and he will add a very instructive context to the conversation. So that being said, while there is no structured sport industry as we would define an industry, I would argue that, I wouldn't call any name because But there are, for example, well-known retail sports outlets that have generated millions of dollars, TT. I'm not saying it is wrong. I'm saying in terms of what is now known as athleisure, you have, you know the brands, right, that I speak of, and major, minor, but you look at any street, any neighborhood, anything in Port of Spain, in Trinidad and Tobago, you see people with sneakers, Puma, replicas, etc. So that element, I tell people that is hundreds of millions of dollars being core stores and malls, etc. You have the horse racing element of it that people don't see as part of the sport industry. Of course, that has suffered. We know where it is, even though that was under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, whatever they call it, right? So we have had major events relative, whether it is FIFA World Cups at age group, we had the Commonwealth Youth Games, we have had continental events, and I say that because events is a subsector in this global industry. We have had countries such as Saudi Arabia, as you will know, Qatar, and these oil-rich countries recognizing that they need to diversify their economy. They have made, interestingly enough, sport as one of the key pillars of their Vision 2030 vision. You go and check it. Even though the developed world have branded some of their efforts sport washing, which is a whole different conversation because I find that, and as you would know, I've articulated, hypocritical. Because you go back to the 1930s with the Commonwealth Games, that was empire sport washing back in the day. So, long-winded answer, right, to your question, but
it's okay. I have a follow-up inside here, which is, as you pause there for a moment, which is that we've played sport, we have organized sport, we have administered sport for a whole long time. If you hear, I've spoken to people who talk about Everton playing football back in the 1920s and 30s, Trinidadian cricketers going as part of a West Indian team to the UK in the 1928 period. And we've had sports. We have international cyclists who have come through the mill over a long period of time. Compton, Gonzalez, and the fellows before that, and so on. What is holding it back? I know when I look, for instance, at the CPL, the Caribbean Premier Cricket League, the T20 League, and I see the owners coming from all over the globe for all kinds of companies, and I see no Caribbean owners, and I wonder if that is part of the problem, the lack of entrepreneurship or the lack of the ability of investors seeing sports as a possibility to grow their businesses.
Tony, I know we're on live, right? But what I'm going to do is, permit me to say this, I will send you a number. I don't have Sir Charles' number for Nelson. And
if you read it out, he will hear you, and he can call the person that you want him to call.
Pardon?
I said if you call out the number, Sir Charles will hear you, and he can attempt to make connection.
Right. So the number, Sir Charles, is 876 999 9627. That is Nelson Christian Stokes,
26,
Jamaica.
27.
I don't know if you could get him. He did say he would be happy to, but he was kind of balancing something. So coming back to your question, follow-up question, Tony, about the entrepreneurial leading. So if you look at the current model, which has been historical, sports in general depend almost entirely on the public purse, a subvention from the ministries, etc. And but so I'm going to have a quick pivot, but that's kind of like this the normal approach, and that has its limitations. But you look on and you see individuals or entities not affiliated necessarily to the national sporting organizations or national governing bodies running events that appear to do well, whether it is the extreme sporting events, whether it is 5Ks, etc. And you see huge numbers, right? And there's a huge ecosystem that is generated. You have the Queen's Park Cricket Club, you have the club of which I remember the Harvard Club. So again, I'm just saying that you have sports bars. All these are elements of a sport industry, but there is no, the entrepreneurial aspect of sport in Trinidad and Tobago operates to a large extent outside of the national governing bodies and national sport bodies.
Brian, I wonder on that score, I wonder if it's the responsibility of the associations, the Cricket Association, the football, etc., who ask for sponsorship, but they do not go, and I'm assuming here, go beyond that to ask for entrepreneurship. Rather than simply sponsorship. So, in other words, nobody has persuaded some of the big corporations that, beyond giving out a few tens of thousands of dollars or whatever the figure is, so that you should invest in the sports in a significant kind of way.
To your point, but sponsorship is not entrepreneurship. So
right.
that I would posit that because the role of the national sport organizations and national governing bodies, their roles essentially are administrative, regulation of their sport. They have, for want of a better descriptive, the franchise from the International Federation. Their remit development, the national teams, and entering the competitions that are sanctioned by their international bodies, their continental bodies, and the regional bodies. So in that regard, sponsorship is relevant and valid in terms of what they do, because that's what's done internationally in an event, whether it is the International Olympic Committee, FIFA, ICC, World Athletics, World Aquatics. So I don't see it necessarily as one and the same. In fact, I would dare say that the role, there is a conflict that can arise where the sport organizations step into the entrepreneurial arm of it. Because it has been argued that their role is sanctioning. So it's not a conflict? I'm not saying yea or nay, I'm putting out some of the, is it not a conflict for them to be sanctioning, providing the umpires, and be running an event? So the other thing about it, that national sport organizations and national governing bodies, regardless of the criticism, and some of it valid, their strength is knowing their sport, the rules, the regulations, etc. They aren't necessarily the skill set of finance, business planning, etc.
Entrepreneurship
is not there. So I do acknowledge that as a small country, people may say, well, it can't be all that, but I still continue to say we have finance industry, we have all kinds of industries here that does well. And I recall when we had the Fort Business TT, there was a point in time where we didn't invite necessarily NGBs, and it was open. The people who came to speak for the panels were, I remember we had people like Daryl White from Royal Bank at the time, Nigel Batiste, Republic Bank, Jason Julian, Conrad O'Neill, former Minister of Finance. I'm just saying the Adrian Schools, people from the Jules Sobian, people from different, who had a success record of entrepreneurship in other sectors, because the basic principles are the same. You have a business plan, an idea, you have to write it up, marketing, finance, you have to be able to convince investors, right? So because we don't necessarily take that approach, people kind of conflate it, in my view, Tony, to say, well, corporate TNT don't do its part. But I don't think that's necessarily true. Corporate TNT will do its part as long as, because in terms of sponsorship, and I've had this experience, you are competing with other charitable organizations, Rainbow Rescue, Cancer, that. So the sponsors look, there's a different, what do you call that? A different formula they look at in terms of sponsorship. And then the other thing about it is sponsors, now we're drifting, but I don't want to do sponsors and corporate entity have told me they are uncomfortable sometimes because it's risky. They're going to see some bacchanal in the papers, something with, and you know what's been happening. So on one hand, they are guided by their corporate social responsibility mandates, because certainly it can't meet return on equity for use of investment. So there's that kind of, people may have different views, but that has been my experience.
Frankly, I think it's a sense of the organizations, the administrations of sport, being hooked on getting sponsorship. And as you and I made the point, there is a difference between sponsorship and entrepreneurship. So that I have been in my time on, a couple administrative committees in tennis, in cricket, and so on. And the mindset really is about getting funding from some corporate sponsor to go through the year with their activities, rather than seeing the possibility. And maybe what we've had generations, plural, of administrators who are soaked into the business of, asking for grants, asking not only corporate sponsors, but the government, the Ministry of Sport, gives out a whole lot of money annually. And maybe the Ministry of Sport also has to start framing its investment, not grants, in terms of saying that a organization, you have to do something about earning funds.
Well, we use investment, but one element of sport in terms of the approaches to government, and this is a debate and a question that happens in most of the global South countries, right? The bigger countries control billions of dollars behind sport. Is sport seen as a public good? And why I say that, but not necessarily want to confine the conversation to that. We know of the argument about the contribution sport can make in terms of social benefits, health, crime, education, the values of sport. So that on one hand, the question in that regard is sport a public good, just as the fire service, the prisons, the police, the defense force, education and schools. You don't necessarily ask the Ministry of Education and Schools to generate a profit. You have a different key performance indicators. What I'm saying is, that's why I started in the beginning saying, it's, to my view, a complex conversation. Of course, the challenge we will always have with sport, as you know, Tony, as someone who I recall seeing you for years, whether it's tennis and whatever. So I know you love and you're passionate about sport. Sport is a very emotive thing. And it's held because of its emotiveness and what it does for the countries where we all live vicariously, whether it is supporting Arsenal, Soca Warriors, the TNT cricket team. It brings a high level of public scrutiny. But we can't discount in anything, and not just sport, the importance of historical antecedents, the impact of colonialism, slavery. How, as I said, Tony, I remember growing up, you had to be able to afford to play sports, right? You know, it's not that long where you had the classist kind of concept about sport. And, you know, that's how, for example, in England, rugby union came about and rugby league. It was only recently that even here in the Caribbean, we look upon sports as being a vibrant career, right? I remember, and we digressing, but it's conceptual. I remember years ago, I brought Dwayne Bravo, while I was president of the Trinidad, to speak to the Olympic Academy, that Olympic Youth Camp. That's an event the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee it has, and it continues under the current president, Dan Henderson, where you get children involved in sport between the ages of 12 and 16 for 2 weeks of activity. And I remember years ago, Dwayne Bravo, now one thing, and he made a statement to the youths, and some of the elders in the room took it. They were offended by it. But I understood it. He said to the young people, you know, he was talking about school education, etc. And he said, you know, I make more than prime ministers. Right? I understood what he was trying to say. That at that time that but remember, it could be a clumsy conversation because he's not business. He said, well, the academic, and because you're bright, perceived as bright, isn't the only way now in the modern world to become somebody, to become financially independent. It's not only, I am paraphrasing here, lawyer, doctor, professional sports person.
Yeah. There's another element of that, Brian, and following what Dwayne has said, there is another benefit that I think our sportsmen and administrators, have dwelled on it for too long. One benefit from sport is fame, but the fame is a fleeting something. It doesn't put anything in your pocket as a sports person.
Exactly.
And therefore, and you know, J.D. Elder, I interviewed him quite a lot of times, and J.D. Elder used to liken it to culture in the same ways that we have culture. A good steel band, a good calypsonian, you sing a little and you get some fame and so on. But J.D. used to say that you have to live from culture.
Correct.
You have to live from sports.
And if I may add, it is because, as I said, of this cultural code that sports is for entertainment and leisure. So there is still, in some countries, a racist, and in other countries, maybe like ours, an elitist classes reflects with which we look at the professionalization. But I want to say this. if, and I know you have been following this, you look, and the trend I'm suggesting, we always tend to be, and this is not offensive, 10 years behind. But I think that the sports ecosystem has to become alive to the reality. So I was going to say this, but before I forget, let me make this point and we could get it, or put it out there. Look at what has happened with the Jamaican athletes and Turkey. And that's why I've been trying to get Nelson. The other part about it, even here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a lot of sportsmen who have become successful entrepreneurs outside of sports. We have seen recently the Dinalad Ramnarayan and Pollard investing in, I think, a green company to do it. We have seen various sportsmen. We have heard about, I don't want to call it, but a lot of the cricketers, you will know most of them. As I said, I don't want to, because of course, nowadays security elements and stuff, who have become successful real estate and property developers. But if you look internationally, Tony, I don't know if you realize a trend now with a lot of the successful American sportsmen and women, basketballers, etc., investing in English football clubs. A lot of the Hollywood stars, whether it's second and third division, investing in, because of course, this is not pre-retirement where some of them, the Johnsons and the Jordans, invested. But I was looking, for example, at the investment portfolio of Kevin Durant as an example. And it's amazing. LeBron James. And they are also investing in like women's football. I don't know if you're paying attention. So I'm saying that it is even evolving to the point now where the sportsmen, of course, people will quote the horror stories of who have lost, the Mike Tyson, 300 million, but those were the older days. I think that the modern iteration of sportsmen and global sportsmen and sportswomen who have made huge sums of money, they have genuine advisors, and you have seen it. They invested in crypto. It's astounding. So I'm saying that just something you mentioned, that is a side benefit, if you want to call it, of their ability to invest. And I'm saying, if you look at the Jamaica model, where the MVP racers and stuff, the Bulls and some of they reinvest back into their sport. So I believe that if we had a more entrepreneurial and industry development element of sport, which we have to evolve to, sport, because I'm saying, if you and I are involved in a sport and we have done well, the opportunity to reinvest in some element of sport, if the proper structures are in place, whether it be tax incentive, the same thing as you do the oil and energy sector, we would give consideration in investing in it. The point I wanted to make also was, look at what is now happening with NCAA and the NIL, name, image, and likeness, where some of these colleges earning millions, and now they have broken on that rule where they have said, and there's a class action suit because colleges have made billions. They now say they have to pay the athletes. So I'm saying that is a progression away, and that I think will bring, maybe not now, maybe in the next 5 years or 10 years, Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean kicking and screaming into the era of professional sports.
Yeah, and I think too, Brian, it's a developmental aspect of the culture, which has to go over a period of time. I am sure that you remembered very well. You talked about Mike Tyson a moment ago, but there are a couple generations of American sportsmen who made hundreds of millions of dollars, and they died as paupers because they didn't understand what had to be done with the money. I was speaking to a financial expert recently, and it's also in the culture, that this person is an accountant, chartered accountant. And some people brought some cultural artists, big cultural artists to him to get financial advice as to how they deal with the money that they had. And he said one or two came. The rest never came because they did not develop their understanding of money and sports and success in that kind of way. I think the generation of the Bravos, as you talk about the Bravos, the Pollards, the Narines, and Russell, etc., etc., and hopefully the likes of Dwight York and so on have done something in terms of advancing the process, because I see it as something that has to evolve over a period of time.
Yeah, Tony, a lot is happening, and as we are saying, from the what you will call, let's call it the mainstream or traditional sport ecosystem, whether it is the traditional sport, the 50-something sport that are branded between the Ministry of Sport and now Youth Development and Sport, TT, that are branded NGBs. They appear to be constantly swimming against the tide. Only recently I saw the volleyball president, Damien Short, saying that they needed $1.5 million to go and honor all their national commitments. In the current environment and economic challenges the country is facing, what's the odds of that happening? But I recently went to an event, a kickboxing event, kickboxing M&A. It was held at the Song Forge.
Mm-hmm.
The place was crammed, Tony, crammed. And I'm just saying, you know what? When I looked around the audience, the females and, just a younger girl, you remember the heyday of wrestling with Rhea Pollard? When the place was packed.
In the Central Market.
Correct. The
They
place was
started in the
packed.
Central Market.
And the people screaming for blood were the females, right? More. I remember as a youth going to Sparrow's Hideaway back to see Lennox Blackmore and Claude Noel. I remember as a youth going in the Savannah, pack, right? PSA, pack. People say it was nostalgic, a college game in John D. and the stadium have 18,000 people. So the funny thing about that is, and I always say this, and forgive me for saying this, right? My first exposure to what I learned decades later was called spot betting, was in the Queen's Park Savannah at PSA and at boxing with a very prominent calypsonian. And the first time I heard a spot bet, I'm using that coming back decades, it was a bet on who will get the first corner. I'm laughing. I don't know whether you're laughing skeptically or you're aware of what I speak of.
I am fully aware of it because I watched, in my youth, I watched football in front of the grandstand. And one of the features, and I didn't understand it very well, I'm talking about when I was 10, 11, 12, something like that. Maple Malvern, fellas with wads of dollars in their hands, walking around and say, taking Malvern with 2 goals. I didn't understand clearly what it meant. So betting was going on long time.
And then the same Jim Harden, and then now we digressing, but we're not digressing, right?
No, we're not digressing.
I remember seeing the elders around where I grew up on Bedford Lane with this little card playing the English football.
Yeah. Penny a line.
Right. And then we had a horse racing, right? What I'm sharing, not saying, is that there has always been a sport industry in Trinidad and Tobago, but not because of the historical antecedents and cultural code, it has never been brought mainstream.
Yeah. But Brian, let me give you something, because sitting here talking about it and thinking about it in ways that I didn't think about before. And I'm giving you this, if you haven't had it before, to take to the powers that be. They go listen to me. You write in stupidness in the paper. But you are an administrator that they have to take on. Perhaps the Ministry of Sport has to take on a completely different character. Because the Ministry of Sport, and I'm not saying dismissing the portfolio that it now has to help associations and so on, but start to professionalize the whole sport. So it's not a matter of giving out funds only, remember I said only, but also attempting to insert into the sporting organizations and culture professionalism. You have to earn your living, given that the ministry is giving you some kind of quota on an annual basis.
Well, that is a valid approach, but I think it has limits to it. Because at the end of the day, as you were saying earlier on, it's more administrative, regulatory, right? Point to consider, because I'm sure we're having so much fun with this discussion, we realize that this is something we may have to explore further for a bit, like a series on it. I recall, because at one point I was chairman of Caledonia AIA, part of the Professional Football League. And at one point I served on the TT Pro League Marketing Committee when Dexter Skeen was the chief executive officer and Larry Romani was the chair. And I recall there was a point in time that the professional league, and I could be stand corrected, funding or justification was coming through the Ministry of Trade. Hear me out?
Okay.
It was also very instructive that horse racing still remains under the Ministry of Trade. I believe that even in the developed countries that we look at, there's a division between amateur sport, recreation sport, and professional sport. I believe consideration may have to be given to whether developing sport as an industry should be under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, if there's one. I don't know what they call it, one of the current iteration. Yeah. Because as you would appreciate, there are different requirements, right? I also wanted to add this. When you look at part of the industry, gyms, I don't see gyms running the Ministry of Sport. I don't see sports medicine. If you understand what I'm saying, I don't see the sport drink elements. Again, I'm just food for thought, Tony, as part of this conversation as an initial salvo. There are elements of the sport industry that are thriving. I don't see, I could be wrong, I don't see powerboat. You don't see they have the same issue. Now, I understand for those who may say, but they have a different element, the golf. The point I'm making is, when you start to look at the broader path of it, right? Tony, there is a sport that has landed on Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know if you're aware of it, but it's scaling, to use a investment and business terms. Pickleball. You're now seeing pickleball courts going up.
Wooden rackets. It's a cousin of lawn tennis.
And whatever, but here's the point. That those courts have a commercial element. They didn't build it for Phil. even if people put together money, they have to pay thing. The equipment. So this is what I'm saying. I don't even know. I remember when I was trying to do some research, being able to get information, statistical information from the Central Statistical Office. I don't even, there was a point in time a category sports industry didn't form part. I stand corrected. I remember for one semester teaching a class in the UE Sports Management Master's Program on entrepreneurship. I know a young man, very talented footballer who got injured, went to Columbia University, I think it is, to do sport finance. His name is Rashad Hyacinth. Right? Today he's out there comfortably because there is no sport finance taking place. But he is out there in the USA. And the conversations he are having on a daily basis, because you see what's happening, right? So now there are sport economists, sport financial specialists who, just like any industry, the LA Lakers just sold for what, 10 billion US? Tony, you ever thought in your lifetime you would 10 billion US?
You know, this might be a little bit of a controversial point that has just struck me. A certain class of administrator has come through into this various sports organizations, tennis, football, cricket, etc., whatever, weightlifting, boxing. Well, boxing has a little bit of a different history because it's prize fighting. You have to get dollars and so on. But it has not been an entrepreneurial class of people. The entrepreneurs have gone into business, manufacturing, trading, a whole lot of them in trading and so on. But the administrative class in sports come from a background of amateurism. They don't see their particular sports as being a financial industry. And therefore, I haven't thought about this deeply. It just struck me. But I can match the social class and the people who have come to sports administration. They are not entrepreneurs. They are administrators who are waiting for a handout from the government or from some corporate industry.
Well, that's a bit harsh, but I understand what you say. Let me just say, I land on the side of entrepreneurial and entrepreneurship, but I'm also a realist in this sense and a pragmatist. Pick any country, Italy, any one of the developed countries, the people who administrate sports, yes, they may be qualified but they aren't the entrepreneurs. The English clubs now they are businessmen, people and entrepreneurs. The English FA is still the English FA. It is a different skill set, right? Now, your point is valid in terms of volunteerism. The fact is, amateur sport, school sports, youth sport in America and a lot of these countries are still volunteer-based. I don't want to use the word amateur. A lot of them at that level still have to pay their way to travel and play for their country. The challenge we are facing is television, the internet, where we are conflating, I'm not saying this in a condescending manner, what we see on TV in terms of professional sport, where the investment is billions and hundreds of millions. So unless we take an industry approach to sport, how are we going to pay administrators So how will you pay somebody to leave their job where they have a salary coming in, pension benefits, etc., to go into something that it don't have those things? I'm saying these are the conundrum we face, and these are part of the necessary conversation. And your point is not contentious, it is a valid point. The question is, in a country of 1.3 million people, how realistic it is for all the sports to be professional.
Yeah, well, that's impossible. Not even in the developed world, that you have every particular sport as a professional sport.
And some of them are still recreational.
Yeah, you say, of course, and that will continue.
I will make a statement that some have taken the wrong way over time. We have the Ministry of Sport and Culture in very good work in the main. We have sport companies. We have in UTT a sports academy. We have in UE a sports section. Nothing wrong with that. But these people are paid. So if you look at sport companies, they are paid to tell, direct, and guide volunteers what to do, what not to do a strategic plan, submit your audited accounts. In that context, is it not valid that maybe we need to relook at that model? If you have a sport thing, I'm not saying that, so they will argue, yes, but I have 6 sports under me. What maybe would a look is, you shouldn't have 6 sports under you. What we may need is that since we have these resources being paid, we assign these paid resources to the various sports, so at least they will have one person who is full-time, skilled as a requisite knowledge and education to be able to implement and execute the strategic plan developed by the volunteers who have been elected. I'm just saying as a citizen, these conversations have been had and people have said.
Well, I tell you what, Brian, our time has gone. And clearly, as you indicated earlier, we have started a conversation. Not that this is original. I am sure that this has been talked about, written about before, but we've started it again, as it were. And I'm sure that we're going to return to the subject soon and into the future. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon in both segments of the program. And I assure you, I will call on you at another point in time, perhaps when you get the Jamaican, and the Jamaicans obviously have taken their sports far more seriously than we have. So,
yeah,
Chalo,
I know you had a prior engagement. Thank you very much, Mr. Fraser, for the opportunity.
Part of the responsibility that we share, right, Chalo?
Of course.
Over to you.
Okay, no
tomorrow, just indicate that tomorrow we're talking about one of the most painful subjects anywhere in the Caribbean these days, West Indies cricket. But I leave you with that.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you very much. Have a blessed evening.
Okay, thanks very much, Brian. I tried getting onto the guy, but I wasn't getting onto him.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much, Tony. And people, this has been Drive Time Exchange right here on New Era TT Radio. Stay with us. Coming up in a few minutes, David Mohammed with the Black Agenda.
I'm telling you, nah. So me I party until it rain, nah. I dressing up in my red, white and black. I don't care what nobody say. Every carnival I done day. Plus I know all artists and all the mass bands. Them say I'm mad and I'm bad. I'm telling you where I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. As I Trini, Popo Trini, a Trini. Cause they love how Trini does look. And they like how Trini does cook. And they like to hear Trini talk. And they like Trini woman walk.